I was never meant to exist, or at least that's what my family said. On the day of my father's will reading, my sister smirked as if the crown was already hers, her words slicing through me. The family mistake doesn't get a penny. I could feel the room turning against me, every laugh digging the knife deeper. But then the judge cleared his throat, pulling out a sealed envelope no one expected. My sister froze, her smile collapsing, because inside those pages lay a truth so devastating it would destroy the perfect world they built, and finally set me free. The Carter house always looked like something out of a magazine, gleaming white columns, a manicured lawn, and tall windows that seemed to glow every night with golden light. Outsiders saw it as the portrait of the American dream. Inside those walls, however, I learned early that appearances were carefully constructed lies. My sister Victoria was the star of every family photograph, her smile polished, her posture perfect, while I often stood at the edges, my figure blurred, sometimes even cropped out entirely. The biggest portrait in the living room proved it. A grand frame of polished oak displayed our family at a Christmas gathering years ago, but my face had been cut off by the edge of the photo, leaving me as nothing more than a shoulder and a hint of hair. Every time I walked past it, it whispered the same cruel message: "You don't belong here." That morning, as the house filled with distant relatives gathering for my father's funeral, I stood alone at the base of the staircase, my black dress too plain compared to the silk and jewels that draped across Victoria. She was radiant, or at least she made sure everyone believed it. "The pride of the family," they called her, as if repeating the phrase often enough made it gospel. I had learned to accept my role as the invisible one, though the ache never faded. People bustled around me with forced sympathy, patting my shoulder, telling me how strong Victoria was for holding the family together. Not one person said that to me. My grief was invisible. My father had been the only one who offered me quiet nods of reassurance, rare words of encouragement when no one else was listening, and now, with him gone, I felt like the last fragile thread tying me to this family had snapped. I was about to slip away to the garden when a man in a dark suit approached me. He wasn't one of our relatives. He held out a plain white envelope, my name written across the front in my father's familiar handwriting. "This was meant for you," he said quietly before disappearing into the crowd. My heart pounded as I clutched the envelope. My father had left me something private. I wanted desperately to tear it open, but voices behind me cut through my thoughts. "Evelyn!" Victoria's sharp tone cracked like a whip. She stood at the top of the staircase, commanding the room like she owned it. Her black dress fit like armor, her chin lifted high. "Come up here." All eyes turned to me, as if I were a servant summoned to perform. I tucked the envelope into my purse and climbed the steps slowly, each one heavy with dread. When I reached her, she leaned close enough that only I could hear. "Don't embarrass yourself today. Father's legacy belongs to me. You were just the family mistake." The words hit me like a slap, even though I had heard them before. She didn't care who overheard. A few relatives nearby chuckled nervously, unwilling to confront her. My mother, standing beside Victoria, offered no defense. Her silence spoke louder than any insult. Her eyes drifted past me as though I weren't even there, as though I had never been her child. I felt a wave of heat rush to my face, shame flooding my veins. For a moment, I wondered if Victoria was right. Had my entire life been nothing more than proof of an accident my parents regretted? I lowered my head, trying to disappear, but the laughter of cousins and the approving nods aimed at Victoria told me there was no escape. As the crowd dispersed into smaller conversations, I found a quiet corner and finally pulled the envelope from my purse. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was not a letter, but a single photograph, faded and grainy, of a child I didn't recognize. On the back, scrawled in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 words that sent a shiver down my spine. "She is not who you think she is." I stared at the picture, my breath caught in my throat. Who was this girl? Why would my father send me this instead of words of comfort? My mind spiraled, 1,000 possibilities flashing in front of me. Was this about Victoria? About me? About someone else in the family? The walls of the Carter house suddenly felt smaller, suffocating, as though the truth was pressing in from every direction. And for the first time that day, I realized something terrifying. My father had known a secret so dangerous, he hadn't trusted anyone else to keep it, except me. The next day, the air inside the Carter estate felt heavier, thick with whispers and speculation. Preparations were underway for the reading of my father's will, and every relative seemed to know something I didn't. I wasn't invited into the study where the key discussions happened. I stood in the hallway, watching through the crack of the door as my uncles and cousins leaned toward Victoria, hanging on her every word. My mother sat proudly at her side, her hand resting on Victoria's arm as though crowning her the rightful heir before the will was even opened. I tried to step into the room, to sit at the table where I also belonged, but the moment I reached the threshold, Aunt Margaret blocked my path with a brittle smile. "Oh, Evelyn," she said sweetly, "this is a private matter. We don't want to overwhelm you." Overwhelm me? My father's estate was my business too, but I swallowed my protest as laughter rippled from inside. I caught phrases floating through the room. "Of course Victoria will inherit. Your father always trusted her. The company will be in good hands." Each word chipped away at me, feeding the doubt already planted by years of dismissal. I retreated to the corridor, heart pounding, hands clenched so tightly my nails dug into my skin. No one even noticed I was gone. To them, I was already erased, excluded as though my existence was an inconvenience they'd long ago decided to ignore. Later that evening, as the relatives gathered in the drawing room for drinks, I stood on the edge of the crowd. I forced myself to speak, to remind them I was still here. "Father wanted fairness," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "He wouldn't have left me with nothing." A hush fell for a moment, but then someone chuckled. Uncle Henry, his drink sloshing in hand. "Fairness?" he sneered. "Your father was a practical man. He knew who could carry the family name and who could not." His eyes slid toward me with deliberate cruelty. Others murmured agreement, and when I opened my mouth to defend myself, Cousin Rachel cut me off sharply. "Don't embarrass yourself, Evelyn. This is not your fight." The room filled again with chatter, swallowing me whole. My words meant nothing. My presence meant nothing. I stood there, heat rising to my face, willing myself not to break in front of them. I slipped away down the hall, desperate for silence. As I passed the library, I heard hushed voices, my mother's and Victoria's. I froze just outside the door, pressing my back against the wall. "No one else can know," my mother whispered, her tone urgent. "They won't," Victoria replied, her voice sharp with certainty. "This secret dies with us. Evelyn is too blind to ever find out." "Good," my mother breathed, "because if she does, everything unravels." My breath caught in my throat. A secret? About me? About Victoria? I pressed a hand against my chest to steady the pounding inside. Their words tangled with the photograph in my purse, the message scrawled by my father. "She is not who you think she is." The walls seemed to close in. The following day, the entire family gathered in the grand dining room. Victoria stood tall at the head of the table, her hand resting dramatically on the back of our father's chair, claiming the space as her own. "We all know what Father wanted," she declared, her voice smooth and commanding. "I have always been the one to uphold the Carter name, while Evelyn—" She turned her eyes on me, her smile razor sharp. Well, she was simply a mistake that lingered too long. Laughter rippled around the table, cruel and careless. My face burned as memories surged unbidden. I was 16 again, clutching a letter of acceptance to a prestigious university, until it vanished. Weeks later, Victoria had it, telling me the school had changed its mind. I believed her. At 19, I fell in love with Daniel, a boy who swore he adored me, until he confessed Victoria had promised him money and status if he chose her instead. Again, I believed her when she said it was for the best. And now, in this room filled with smirks and snickers, I realized every step of my life had been sabotaged by the sister everyone adored. My voice cracked when I tried to speak. But the words dissolved before they reached my lips. Inside my head, a darker whisper took hold. Maybe they're right. Maybe I was never supposed to exist. Maybe I should have disappeared long ago. The thought chilled me, heavier than grief, sharper than rage. I lowered my gaze, unable to meet their eyes, ashamed of the weakness they had carved into me. Across the room, I caught sight of Uncle John, my father's older brother, quiet and stooped with age. He sat apart from the others, hands folded, his face lined not only with years, but with something deeper, guilt. His eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and I saw something flicker there. Regret. Knowledge. He looked away quickly, but I knew in that instant he was holding back a truth that could shatter everything. The day of the will reading arrived, and the atmosphere inside the courthouse was suffocating. The Carters filled the room, dressed in black but shimmering with jewels, their voices low yet charged with anticipation. My mother sat with her hand firmly on Victoria's, whispering praise into her ear as though crowning her before the words were spoken. I sat alone at the far end of the table, clutching the photograph my father had left me, the one with the cryptic words written on the back. The envelope was worn from how many times I had folded and unfolded it, as though the paper might give me answers if I pressed hard enough. The judge cleared his throat, shuffling the stack of documents in front of him. Silence fell across the room, but not before Victoria stood up. She placed both hands on the table, leaned forward, and let out a laugh. "Before we go through this little formality," she began, her voice syrupy and cruel, "let's acknowledge what we all know. Father's empire is mine. Evelyn was always the family's mistake. Do we really think he would entrust her with anything of value?" The room erupted in laughter. Even my mother smiled faintly, her eyes sliding away from me as if ashamed to meet my gaze. The words pierced me deeper than any blade could. My cheeks burned. My lungs struggled to hold air. I thought about standing up, leaving this charade, disappearing from their sight forever. It would be easier than sitting there, their ridicule hammering against me. Just as I pushed my chair back, ready to flee, the judge's voice cut through the chaos. He adjusted his glasses and read aloud, "To my beloved Evelyn." The room froze. Every laugh died mid-breath. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. My eyes darted across the table. Victoria's smirk collapsed, her mouth parting in disbelief. My mother's hand slipped from her daughter's arm. The judge continued, his tone steady but heavy with weight. "You have been the one I trusted beyond all others." I couldn't breathe. The words struck me like lightning, a mixture of shock and an almost unbearable ache. My father had seen me, trusted me, loved me, even when no one else had. For the first time, I felt the possibility of worth flicker inside me, but before the judge could go further, he paused. He rifled through the stack of papers and frowned. "This will has an attached supplement," he announced. "A sealed provision to be read separately. Its content is restricted until proper authorization." The tension snapped back into the room like a whip. The spell was broken, and in its place came a surge of rage. "She forged it!" Victoria screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "This is a lie. She somehow tricked Father into rewriting the will." "Yes," my mother added sharply. "This cannot be real. Evelyn must have tampered with it." Voices joined in like a mob, accusing, condemning, their words a storm of venom. My head spun. I clutched the edge of the table, but their words crawled into my mind like poison. What if they were right? What if I didn't deserve this? I had always been weak, always been pushed aside. Perhaps this really was a mistake. My chest tightened, and I thought I might collapse right there in front of them. I stumbled out of the room, tears threatening to break through. Down a narrow hallway, I found a bench and sank onto it, burying my face in my hands. The sobs came then, raw and uncontrollable. Memories of my father flickered in the dark. his quiet smile when I succeeded at something small, the rare squeeze of my shoulder when I thought no one noticed, the way he once whispered, "Don't let them convince you you're nothing." And yet, here I was, trembling, nearly convinced that I was nothing. I pulled the photograph from my purse, pressing it to my chest as though my father's handwriting could anchor me. "She is not who you think she is," it read. The words blurred through my tears. Who was she? Was it Victoria? My mother? Me? I had no answers, only fear and exhaustion. I wiped my face and forced myself back into the room. The judge stood ready, a separate envelope in his hands. His gaze was firm, as though bracing for the explosion his words might ignite. "Alongside the will," he said slowly. "Your father left a personal letter to be read now." He broke the seal, unfolded the pages, and began to read aloud. "My dearest Evelyn, if you are hearing this, then the truth can no longer remain hidden. The truth about Victoria." The words hung in the air like thunder before the storm, and the room seemed to tilt beneath me. Every eye turned toward me, but I couldn't look at them. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I knew whatever came next would shatter everything. The judge's voice filled the courtroom, each word striking the air like a gavel. "Evelyn, if you are hearing this, then you must know the truth. For too long, Victoria has stolen from this family. She siphoned funds, forged documents, and betrayed the trust placed in her. But I have always known you were the one with the integrity to protect what matters most. Do not let them convince you otherwise." My breath caught. For a moment, I couldn't move. The laughter and accusations from my family echoed in my ears, but suddenly they felt distant, like faint noise behind glass. My father had seen it all, the betrayal, the deceit, and instead of ignoring it, he had chosen to trust me. Me, the invisible one, the mistake. A warmth spread through my chest, quickly igniting into something stronger, rage. Not the wild, reckless fury that blinds, but a fire sharpened into clarity. Every insult Victoria had ever thrown at me, every time my mother had turned her eyes away, every laugh from the relatives who dismissed me, suddenly, I saw them for what they were, tools of control. They had broken me down so they could keep me small, manageable, but my father had refused to play their game. He had left me the truth, and now it was mine to wield. The judge cleared his throat again and opened another envelope. Inside were several thin booklets, financial records. He handed them across the table, sliding them directly toward me. "Your father requested these be placed in your care," he said. I touched the papers with trembling fingers, scanning the numbers, the signatures, the transfers. My stomach knotted as I realized what I held. Proof. Pages of evidence that showed Victoria had been embezzling money from the family company for years, funneling funds into accounts under her name. Gasps echoed around the room as some of the relatives peered over my shoulder. Victoria's face drained of color, then flushed with anger. "Lies!" she spat, slamming her fist on the table. "Fabrications! Evelyn has tampered with this." But even as she shouted, her eyes flickered toward the documents with recognition. She knew, and so did I. I clutched the records tighter, like a shield. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking beneath her words. I was standing taller, the fire inside me growing. My father had armed me with the truth, and with it, I wasn't powerless anymore. That night, back at the estate, I locked myself in my father's study. His scent lingered faintly on the leather chair and the books that lined the shelves. I spread the records across the desk, arranging them into neat piles. Each page was a weapon, each signature a strike. The more I studied them, the more I saw a path forming, not just for survival, but for victory. The door creaked open softly, and Mr. Harris, my father's attorney, stepped inside. His gray eyes met mine with steady calm. "He trusted me to guide you, Evelyn," he said quietly. "If you choose to fight this, I'll be by your side." I nodded, my throat tight. For the first time, someone was offering to stand with me, not against me. We began sorting the evidence, preparing the case, building the strategy brick by brick. Harris explained the steps. filing the documents with the court, freezing Victoria's accounts, ensuring the will remained valid against challenges. It was overwhelming, but with every detail, my confidence grew. Meanwhile, Victoria was working the relatives like a puppeteer. I heard her in the hallways, spinning her lies, painting herself as the rightful heir betrayed by a jealous sister. Some believed her, others wavered. The house buzzed with tension, alliances shifting like sand. Later that evening, I returned to my room. Exhaustion pressed down on me, but I couldn't rest. I opened my journal, the one I had started as a teenager, filled with desperate thoughts I never dared to say aloud. Tonight, I wrote to my father. "You saw me when no one else did," I scrawled. "You believed in me. I promise I won't fail you. I'll protect what you built. I'll protect the truth. And maybe, in doing so, I'll finally protect myself." I paused, letting the ink dry, tears blurring the words. The rage had steadied into something calmer, deeper. Resolve. As I flipped to the back of the journal, a folded piece of paper slipped out, one I had never noticed before. My heart stuttered. I opened it with trembling hands. It was in my father's handwriting. "If you've come this far, Evelyn, then it's time you knew. Victoria. She is not my daughter by blood." The words swam before my eyes. My knees weakened and I dropped into the chair. The fire inside me blazed even higher. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about inheritance. It was about identity, about a truth buried so deep it could tear apart the family forever. And now, that truth was in my hands. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers as the judge prepared to deliver his final words. My heart thundered inside my chest, every beat echoing in my ears. All the arguments, all the venom Victoria had spewed, all the whispers from the relatives who doubted me, it was all about to be settled. The judge raised his voice. "According to the final authenticated will of Mr. Richard Carter, the majority of the estate, including controlling shares of the Carter Company, the family properties, and all financial holdings, are hereby bequeathed to his daughter, Evelyn Carter." Gasps rippled through the room. Some relatives clapped their hands to their mouths. Others leaned forward as though they hadn't heard correctly. My mother sat rigid, her face pale. Victoria, however, stood frozen like a statue, her jaw trembling, her knuckles white against the polished wood of the table. The judge continued, sliding the financial documents into evidence. "Additionally, Mr. Carter left extensive records of financial misappropriation under the name of Victoria Carter. These documents prove that she embezzled company funds over several years, forging signatures and creating false accounts. The evidence is irrefutable." The murmur in the courtroom swelled to a storm. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, some filled with disbelief, others with a new recognition, as though they were seeing me for the first time. For years, they had dismissed me as the weak one, the mistake. Now, the truth was painted in black ink across the pages of my father's records. The judge paused. "Furthermore, testimony has been provided by Mr. John Carter." My Uncle John, frail but steady, rose from his seat. His voice quivered, but his words cut through the noise. "It is true. Victoria is not Richard's biological daughter. She was taken in, adopted in secret, because the family thought the scandal would ruin our name. We raised her as one of our own. But it was Evelyn who carried Richard's blood, his integrity, his spirit, and it is Evelyn who deserves his legacy." The revelation exploded through the room like a bomb. My mother buried her face in her hands. Aunts and cousins gasped, their whispers rising into a frantic chorus. Victoria's eyes widened in horror, then narrowed into slits of fury. "You're lying!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "All of you! This is a conspiracy! Evelyn bribed you, forged those papers, twisted Father's words. This isn't over! Do you hear me?" Her voice rose to a shriek. "This is not the end!" She lunged toward the documents, but bailiffs stepped forward, blocking her path. Her chest heaved with rage, her face red with humiliation. She whipped around, her gaze locking onto me. "You think you've won, Evelyn? You haven't won anything. You destroyed this family. You are the mistake." But for once, her words didn't break me. I sat tall, the fire of my father's trust burning inside me, steady and unshaken. The judge called order, but the room had already unraveled. Victoria's shrill voice echoed even as she was forced back into her seat. The relatives looked on, stunned, their image of the perfect Carter family crumbling piece by piece. When the session adjourned, chaos spilled into the halls. Victoria stormed toward me, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. "This is your fault," she spat, her face twisted. "You turned everyone against me. You took everything that was mine." "It was never yours," I said quietly but firmly. Her hands shook, and for a moment I thought she might strike me. Instead, she turned on my mother. "And you," she hissed, "you let this happen. You stood there and let her steal everything." My mother broke then, her facade collapsing. Tears streaked down her face. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I let myself believe Victoria was flawless. I made Evelyn suffer because I couldn't face the truth, and now look what I've done." Her shoulders shook, her sobs echoing down the corridor. The aunts and uncles who once whispered behind my back now stared openly, some with shame, others with disgust at Victoria. The grand illusion of the Carters, a proud, united, respectable family, was disintegrating before their eyes. Victoria's laughter cut through the air, brittle and wild. "You're all cowards," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You think you've destroyed me? No, this isn't finished. I'll make you all regret this." She spun on her heel and bolted toward the exit. I followed her with my eyes, my chest tight with a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Outside, the sky had opened, rain pouring down in silver sheets. Victoria disappeared into the storm, her silhouette a blur against the gray, swallowed by the night as her heels clattered down the courthouse steps. The last words she screamed still echoed in my ears. "This is not the end!" The weeks that followed were a blur of headlines, lawsuits, and shattered illusions. Newspapers splashed Victoria's face across their front pages with bold titles. "Carter Heiress Exposed for Fraud," "Family Fortune in Jeopardy," "Secrets Behind the Carter Legacy." Reporters hounded the estate gates, their cameras flashing every time someone entered or left. The empire Victoria had tried so hard to control was crumbling under the weight of her deceit. Her bank accounts were frozen. Creditors came knocking, lawsuits piled high. Former allies abandoned her. Those who once praised her now whispered her name with disgust. She had become a pariah, not just in the business world, but within the very family she once commanded. For the first time in her life, Victoria Carter had no audience to applaud her perfection. The Carter family name itself was tainted. Relatives who once basked in its shine now distanced themselves, fearing the fallout. Those who had ridiculed me sat in silence when they passed me in the halls. Some offered half-hearted apologies, muttered words of regret, but they were hollow, too little too late. The truth was undeniable. The pedestal they had built for Victoria had splintered into dust. For me, the storm brought something unexpected. Vindication. The whispers stopped, the laughter silenced. I was no longer the family mistake. I was the daughter my father had trusted. The weight of shame I had carried for years finally began to lift. Yet the victory didn't feel like triumph over them. It felt like freedom from them. One evening, I found myself at the cemetery, the rain-softened earth cool beneath my heels as I walked toward my father's grave. The air was quiet, broken only by the rustle of leaves. I knelt before the headstone, brushing away the dirt from his name. My throat tightened, tears welling as I whispered, "I did it, Dad. I stood my ground. I didn't let them erase me. You were right. I was strong enough. I made it." The words lingered in the night air, a confession and a promise all at once. For the first time in years, I felt as though my father's hand was on my shoulder again, steadying me, guiding me forward. But victory didn't mean revenge. I realized I didn't want to be defined by their cruelty or my anger. My father's legacy wasn't just money or property, it was integrity, resilience, and compassion. And I wanted to honor that. In the months that followed, I worked with Mr. Harris to establish a foundation in my father's name. The Carter Scholarship Fund was created for children who had been overlooked, dismissed, or cast aside. Children like me, who had been told they were mistakes. Each time I read an application from a student desperate to prove themselves, I saw a reflection of my younger self. And each time we awarded a scholarship, I felt a piece of healing take root inside me. The mansion grew quieter. Many relatives stopped visiting altogether. My mother retreated into her own silence, weighed down by guilt for the years she had chosen favoritism over fairness. We barely spoke, but I no longer sought her approval. Her remorse was hers to bear. My life had moved beyond needing her acknowledgement. The grand portrait in the living room still hung on the wall, the one where my face had been cropped out. But one afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the windows, I took it down. Behind it, tucked into the frame, I found another photograph, one my father must have hidden. It was the same Christmas scene, but this time my full face was visible, smiling despite the coldness around me. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words, "You belong, Evelyn. Don't ever forget it." Tears slipped down my cheeks as I held the photo to my chest. My father had fought for me in silence, even when I didn't know it. Now it was my turn to live the truth he had always seen. The day came when I walked through the halls of the Carter estate one last time. The chandeliers still glittered, the marble floors still gleamed, but to me, it felt hollow, an echo of a gilded cage I no longer wished to live in. I gathered my things, leaving the weight of the past behind. As I reached the front doors, I paused, glancing back. The grand hallway stretched before me, ending at the wall where the family portrait had once hung. Now, only an empty space remained, the plaster pale where the frame had shielded it from years of sunlight. It was as though the house itself had exhaled, shedding the illusion of perfection it had clung to. I stepped outside. The sun broke through the clouds, casting warm light across the driveway. For the first time in my life, I felt no shadow over me, no chains binding me to their judgment. The air tasted like possibility, fresh and sharp. I walked down the steps, past the iron gates, and into the world beyond. My heels clicked against the stone, steady and strong. I carried no jewels, no titles, no need for their approval. What I carried instead was freedom. Freedom born from pain, forged in fire, and strengthened by truth. And as I walked away, I knew I wasn't the family mistake. I was the survivor. I was the rightful heir, not just to my father's fortune, but to his belief that no one, no matter how broken they felt, was ever truly invisible.